Okay. Well, I'll get started and I'll keep letting people in as we move forward. Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Adams. I'm the Chief Curator and Director of Programs at the Bemis Center. Welcome tonight to our Alumni Art Talk with Raven Chacon. Just a few things before we get started. Please keep yourself muted for the presentation, but feel free to use the chat and we will do sort of a short Q&A afterwards. And at that point, we can unmute and have more of a conversation with Raven. But until then, let's stay muted, but please use the chat. Bemis, we are very busy this next couple of weeks. So if you are in the Omaha area or if you want to watch things on the internet, we have a few shows coming up. This Friday, actually, we have Jeremiah Chu and Marta Honer coming in from LA to do a performance at our venue Low End, which I'm really excited about. Personally, Marta was just in that video with Beyonce for the Oscars. So, I mean, just gonna say it, it's pretty cool. Really excited for them. Next Friday on the 29th, we have Jamie Branch's band Fly or Die coming. Jamie actually came to perform as a solo act in January, and now the entire band is coming back. They're actually going to be recording an album in our Okada space, and then our performance will be in the Okada space. So it's a little bit different. It is a live at Low End, but just across the street. So again, if you're in the area, this won't be streamed, unfortunately, but if you are in Omaha, please come check it out. It's going to be really fun. On May 7th, we have our next exhibition opening, Maya Dunitz's Root of Two, and Maya is an Israeli-based artist. She is a sound artist and composer, and we're super excited to host her sort of first major solo exhibition in the US. She'll actually be performing at the opening with Roscoe Mitchell around 4 p.m. So again, if you are in the Omaha area, please come down for the opening. This show is something we've been working on for several years now, and we're just so excited to open it to the public. One room has 17 pianos in it, so just sort of a sight to be seen for sure. And I think I just saw him join. On the 12th, we have a performance by Crank Sturgeon, who'll be coming to visit us from Maine. And then we'll be doing a workshop with him on the 14th. So if you're interested in making some contact mics and then playing badminton with them, I highly suggest you sign up for this workshop and come hang out with us at Bemis on the 14th from 3 to 5. So that is all in the next 3.5 weeks, 4 weeks. So as I said, we're pretty busy, but we're excited about the spring and what's coming up. Just as a reminder, we still have one open call open right now for our residency program. So if you're an artist who's interested in applying, the fall 2023 residency open call is still up on our website. Very easy to find, just bemiscenter.org/apply. I'll put that in the chat for you, and that is actually not due till August 1st. So you have a little bit of time, but don't sleep on this because it'll be August 1st before we know it. And then finally, I just want to thank you all for joining us. We are an organization that prides ourselves on being free and accessible to the public. We can't do that without the support of many of you. So please, oh, hi, baby. Mommy's on the Zoom, okay? Okay, I'll get you a popsicle in a second. Yeah, so please feel free to support us. That was my kid Conrad making a cameo here. And yeah, I think that's all my housekeeping at the moment. Feel free to chat me if you have any questions about any of this, and I'm happy to answer that. So I'm going to stop sharing. Hi, everyone. Okay, so tonight we are here for the Alumni Art Talk with Raven Chacon. We're very, very lucky to have Raven as an artist in residence in 2019. He was actually our inaugural sound artist in residence, and last year he was named as the inaugural Ree Kaneko Alumni Award winner. As part of Bemis's 40th anniversary, we were able to increase the award, our alumni award, which started at $5,000 to $25,000. And we sort of honored our founder, Ree Kaneko, by renaming the award after her. And Bemis, Raven was chosen by a jury of professionals as the 2021 Ree Kaneko Alumni Award winner. Raven is a composer, performer, and installation artist from Fort Defiance, Navajo Nation. As a solo artist, collaborator, and with Postcommodity, he has exhibited or performed at the Whitney Biennial, Documenta 14, REDCAT, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Montreal, San Francisco Electronic Music Festival, Chaco Canyon, the 18th Biennial of Sydney, and the Kennedy Center. He's currently exhibiting as a solo artist in the Whitney Biennial. He's going to talk about the work that he did for that tonight. Each year, he teaches 20 students to write string quartets for the Native American Composer Apprenticeship Project. He is a recipient of the United States Artist Fellowship in Music, Creative Capital Award in Visual Arts, the Native Arts and Cultural Foundation Artist Fellowship, and American Academy Berlin Prize for Music Composition. He currently lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And as I mentioned, Raven was our inaugural sound artist in residence in summer of 2019, even before we were able to actually finish building out the recording studio and rehearsal space and low end actually, but he helped a lot in terms of consulting with that, figuring out what equipment we were going to buy, all of those wonderful things. So thank you again, Raven, for doing that. He was also one of the co-curators of our exhibition that summer called Inner Ear Vision, which was a large group exhibition that sort of took all of Bemis's spaces and co-curated with Robert Ike, Aubrey Lowe, and Maria Bustek. That was a really important exhibition for us to sort of launch the idea of the Sound Arts program, to kind of show how sound arts is integrated throughout all of visual arts as well. I think I'm gonna hand it over to you now, Raven. I feel like that is sort of a good way to end things. But thank you again for being here, and excited to hear you talk.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And thanks everyone for showing up. I'm really appreciative. It's this kind of, like informal Zoom, not one of the webinars where you can't see everybody's faces or at least see the squares. And yeah, it's, I did that work that Rachel was talking about, the residency and the exhibition, co-curating that with Maria and Robert in 2019. And I was there as a resident as well that summer, working on a lot of the work that I'm going to show you today. And the work I'm going to show you today, and I was also working on this opera called Sweetland. And it seems like that was the last time I was out in the world, right? Because in 2020, we all went into the cave, and then now we're coming back out and maybe showing the stuff we've been working on. And so in a way, it feels like I was just at Bemis. I was saying this when I came down last fall to get this award, the Ree Kaneko Award, that I felt like I had just been there in a weird way. But it also, time was really skewed, and I couldn't really remember some things about being there, even though it felt like I was just there. And so yeah, and then during that time, I was asked to show some work in the Whitney Biennial that just opened last month, 3 weeks ago. And so some of that work I was working on while in residence at Bemis was what ended up in this exhibition. And so I definitely want to thank Bemis for giving me that space, physically and mentally and durational to work on this stuff and be in an atmosphere of sound and appreciating sound and getting to work on that exhibition. And I got to make a beer too, out of sound, out of the bottom of the river, with some hydrophones. So maybe somebody has a question about that later. I won't be showing that in my PowerPoint, but I'm happy there's this format too, because if you do have a question in the chat, it's super informal. Maybe I can answer it, and you don't have to save it till the end. But yeah, feel free to just put things in there, and I'll have that window open as well. And so yeah, let me fire up this. Is there the gray thing on the side or no? Does it look
No,
okay,
it's
Rachel?
good. We're good.
Okay. Okay, so the first of these projects that ended up in the Whitney is a project I've been working on since around maybe 2007. In 2007, I was part of an organization of Native American composers and musicians who were starting to gather in these kind of convenings to just find out that each other existed. Some of these folks knew each other, but I was probably the youngest of that kind of cohort at the time. And the eldest of this cohort was a composer, Louis Ballard, widely revered as being maybe the godfather of Native American composers, somebody who had worked their way through this, this genre of music, which is classical instruments, and had made a career of this. And I was thinking, he's still alive. He couldn't have been the first. I mean, this country has been around a couple more 100 years than that, and maybe somebody had an opportunity to work with these instruments. And so I was doing some research and came upon this woman, Zikalasha. And this is Zikalasha here. And she was a musician, a violinist, a composer. Not only that, she was a poet, a writer, an activist. She would write, critiques that were published about residential school, about the treatment of American Indians at the turn of the century. She had lived from, I believe it was 1873 to about 1936, and 1876, 1938 was when she lived. And a lot of this work was right at the turn of the century. She had also done things like founded the National Council of the American Indian and had advocated for the right for Native people to vote. And also wrote this thing called the Sundance Opera. And so I was fascinated. I was like, how could one person do all this stuff? This is surely an underrepresented figure in American Indian history, that I wanted to write a large work that told the story of her life. And I was thinking something big, like a symphonic work. And I actually started writing this piece and started doing research. I went to the archives they had at Earl M. University in Indiana to learn more about her time there. I went to the archives at BYU to try to get the score of the Sundance Opera. This is the Sundance Opera here. And was, more importantly, I was speaking with people from her tribe, the Dakota people, other people who were Native scholars who knew about the work she was doing, and realized that this was a complicated figure. This was somebody who, let's say, the work she was doing was not always seen as something beneficial to Native people, especially from Native people. For example, the right to vote, which might seem like a good thing to have accomplished. Native people at the time, in the early 20th century, were saying, well, hey, wait a minute. What makes you think we want the right to vote? We don't even want to be a part of this country. This is imposed on us. There were other maybe things that she had been other stances, other kinds of work she was involved in that might have been not in alignment with certain religious freedoms that tribes were looking to retain. And there was also maybe a kind of flip-flopping stance on residential schools. And so I thought maybe this is not the right way to tell this story through music. I mean, music is kind of hard to tell anything, you know, it's just music sometimes. And yeah, you can make it into an opera or a choral piece and try that. But I was thinking maybe that's not the right approach, and definitely not the right form. Symphonic work is too, it doesn't seem right. It seems too, I don't know, bombastic or something. And so I abandoned that project because I started thinking, who are the Native women of navigating the early 21st century? Friends of mine, teachers, elders, heroes. And how can I talk about what they are dealing with, working towards today? And so I started writing these scores for people. And I'm going to go through the 13 scores that are part of the set called For Zikalasha. So the piece is still a dedication to Zikalasha, but it is in the form of dedications and portraitures to 13 contemporary women sound artists. This is for composer Ange Loft, who's Mohawk from Canada. I think she's based in Toronto these days. And this is the way you play this score. This score actually uses Laban notation, which is a kind of movement notation. And I won't go deep into these scores, and there's a lot to be said about their meaning as well. But the way you play this score is you hold a drum above your head and you have a floor tom, and you oscillate between playing the two in different positions around your body while singing different notes. This is a score for my sister Autumn Chacon, who works a lot with video. She works with sound. A lot of the work she's done is radio, pirate radio. She even had a project where she was able to obtain an FCC license for a tribal community in New Mexico. And she was at Standing Rock. She had a radio station there as well, to kind of give water protectors some news that was happening around the encampment. The way you play this piece is it can be performed in a white cube, the corners of a white cube. It can be performed in the corners of the United States. And there's a set of lamps and radios in different locations. The performer goes around to different corners, turning on and off lamps and radios, mapping the points in the middle that they traverse. And when they have turned all of the lamps and radios off, they go to the point they have traversed the most and sing a song that they remember hearing in between the radio stations. Barbara Crowell was one of that original cohort of Native composers back in 2007. She was known as a quite accomplished composer of chamber music, studied with Helmut Lackaman, and then it kind of dropped off the face of the earth in some way. It was quite hard working on this piece for her, with her, in collaboration with her. I'm a huge fan of her work, but she was very hard to reach. Nonetheless, she has had a very long career. And so this score asks the performer to blow into a flute and hold the tone as long as possible while singing, while humming, while whistling, while hissing. This is a score for Buffy St. Marie, who needs no introduction, I hope. Accomplished singer, activist, and has had a very successful career. She might be considered maybe the Native artist who broke through the most into the mainstream, but at the same time was such a vocal person that about the rights of American Indian people that she was surely blacklisted sometime in there. So this is a score for voice and 2 instruments, and playing the contour of this line with this break in between. And it's meant that you step up the parameters of whatever you assign to these instruments as you ascend the line. This is a score for my wife, Candace Hopkins, who would not consider herself a musician or sound artist or anything. To be honest with you, she'd kill me if she wasn't in this project, but I'm kidding. She writes a lot about sound and indigenous sound artists. She curates this kind of a small group of folks into exhibitions, which is how we met. And she currently has curated this exhibition called Soundings with scholar Dylan Robinson. Phenomenal exhibition that is currently touring to different locations. I think it's an ongoing exhibition that will be has toured a lot in Canada, but will be now something you'll probably see in the States. And so this one, shoot, how do I describe this one? This one starts with a word at the top of the pyramid, and it is to be translated into 2 other words in another language. This is not assuming one knows this language. In fact, it might be a language that you lost or are very disconnected from, but it requires research. One then goes further and puts those into 3 other languages. Those 2 words become 3 words, then back into 2 words, and then finally into your own tongue. There's a sound artist named Carmina Escobar, a vocalist, and I believe she was at Bemis. Was she up there doing something?
She was here in the fall.
Yeah, she was there, and she was also in my Sweetland opera. She had the role of Coyote. Carmina would not consider herself indigenous, and like a lot of mestiza people from Mexico and Latin America, are not encouraged to identify by the indigeneity that they have lost, that has been erased from their lineage. And so I was looking for somebody from Mexico to make one of these scores about, 1-page scores. And I could not find one, and asked Carmina, do you know anyone? And she couldn't name anyone. And I said, well, I know why. It's because there's not a lot of people who identify by their tribal roots. And so I wanted to write a score about that. And so I chose Carmina to write this for that situation of mestizaje. And so how one performs this score is they scream as quiet as possible. And these white shapes are the shape of the mouth to produce that scream. Cheryl Arundel is a Cree singer, musician, composer, and visual artist. She's based in Saskatchewan right now. And she would laugh if I called her an elder here on Zoom, but she's probably always been an elder with her wisdom. And so this score has these dots, and these dots can create this line. And this line should be looked at as a melody. But there's no indication of how big that melody can be, or the range of that melody, or the length of that melody. And one comes up with songs in the shape of that melody, small songs that get turned into one large song over the span of 5 minutes. The song should be in the form of advice, and it should be sung in the dark. Heidi Senungatuk is a violinist and musicologist from Alaska. She is Inupiat from Alaska. And she comes from a tradition of woodworkers. Her father, Ron Senungatuk, was a very well-known artist, wood carver, mask maker. And Heidi played a wooden instrument, violin, and had an interest in playing for the Anchorage Symphony Orchestra and maybe being a composer as a young musician. And so she shared with me that somewhere in there, maybe somebody had told her, that's almost impossible to make a living being a violinist or being in the symphony orchestra, even in Anchorage being, it's not a huge orchestra. And I think she was telling me that someone said, women don't compose. So she still loved music so much, and also, wanted to continue this artistic tradition of her family somehow, that she still dedicated her scholarship to music and went the route of being, studying ethnomusicology and musicology. But more recently has wanted to compose, she still plays a violin, and she's actually woodworking now, which is beautiful to me. The way you play this score, perform this score, it's a little bit complicated. You take this sheet of paper and you get another sheet of tracing paper, and you lay it over the first line, the first staff, and you compose a melody on that first staff. You then put that tracing paper behind this sheet and redraw the dots, the pitches, onto these 4 other kind of skewed staves. And then you play what is basically the same arrangement of dots into all of these 5 staves. And it's that the system has changed, thereby skewing the melody that you wrote in the first place. This score it's not similar, it's about a similar situation. This is a Yakima bassoonist named Jacqueline Wilson. And Jacqueline shared with me that she had to go away from her community to get a music education. And that this had become a conflict in her life. I think it's maybe easier if I talk about the score itself. The way you play this score with this open dot is it's to be played on any woodwind instrument. And when you see the open circle, you're to play that in its normal fingering. So every woodwind instrument, you play a pitch. There's usually a kind of default normal way of playing that pitch. But there can also be other ways to produce that same pitch with an alternate fingering. And that alternate fingering might end up with a different timbre. Maybe it's a little darker tone, maybe it's more shrill, because it's produced by a different means. And so the way that you play this score for Jacqueline Wilson is you play that first note on that first line. The second line, you play it in the normal mode, but oscillate between an alternate fingering. A timbral trill, or bisbigliando is what they call it. The third line, you find 2 alternate fingering. fingerings, or you find a, let's say, a second alternate fingering and then the first one, and you trill between those. The fourth line, it's 3 alternate fingerings. The fifth line is 4 alternate fingerings, and then you go backwards and play 3 alternate fingerings in the normal one, 2 alternate fingerings in the normal fingering, 1 alternate fingering, and then the normal. And then you turn the score on its side, and you play just 1 alternate fingering, 2 alternate fingerings, 3 alternate fingerings, 4 alternate fingerings, and at the very end, you've shape-shifted so many times, it doesn't sound normal anymore. Joy Harjo is a Muskogee poet and is currently the Poet Laureate of the United States. And this is her 3rd time being the Poet Laureate of the United States. She is known worldwide for her writing, and some people know about her saxophone playing and her music and the bands that she has led. So she's a recording artist as well, and also is a vocalist. And so I definitely wanted to write one for Joy. I've been a friend and fan of hers for a long time, and she too was part of that cohort in the 15 years ago or so. And so I wanted to think about somebody who works with words and the symbols of speaking. So diacritics, accents. Also, in speaking with Joy, she told me there were 3 ways that she likes to think of when she's reciting her poetry, when she's sharing that with an audience, or maybe when she's making these poems. She says you might sing or read or perform to yourself. You might sing or read or perform to another, so one other person. And you may sing and read or play to everyone. So those were 3 different modes she saw words or lines or poems. And I started thinking, okay, maybe this can apply to music as well. And so one traverses these different paths, whether this becomes a sound or a word or something played on the saxophone, being altered by these diacritics, accented, extra short, creaky, breathy, raised, voiceless, more rounded, no audible release, in conjunction of singing to yourself or another or everyone. This whole series began with me writing for one of my dearest friends and collaborators, a musician, Laura Ortman, who has also played there at Low End, I believe. Maybe she was one of the first.
She was technically the first.
All right. I know her fairly well, and this one was an easy one to write. I started thinking about Laura's career and her life of originating at White Mountain Apache down in the canyons of that territory, and now living in New York City, and the differences in speed of those 2 places, and wanted to think about just what that might mean to oscillate in different places, to move at different speeds, to travel a lot to different places and have to change your speed in those moments. And so for those who know music notation, these tremolo lines are a violin notation or string notation for how fast you bow. And so normally they're just kind of a slash through the line, but I had some ones go the other direction and don't really say what that means, rather that you're just supposed to do something in contrast or another action that contradicts your previous action, and that should be done at that speed. little grace notes hovering above, which is in even second action, alternate action that one does. So I can tell you how she played this score a few years ago. And she played her violin at the speed that it's indicated when it has the normal slash. When the slash goes the other way, she had this branch of a pine tree sticking out the other end of her, the bow coming out this way, the pine branch coming out this way, and flipped around and started bowing her violin with the pine branch. And then every time that there was a grace note, she would drop it down an octave. Olivia Short is a improviser and community organizer based in Toronto. I like to say that the score is for reading the room. And so Olivia stands in the middle in the round and with the audience surrounding her and faces a direction and gathers information from that audience member or members that are in that path and anything else, shadows, the clock on the wall, the doorway that might be positioned behind there, and uses that as information in whatever she is improvising, and then turns slightly and reads new information. And there is, for 7 of these positions, one cycles through different timbral effects. And for 4 of those directions, any 4 of them, the performer is to play quietly. And the last of this series is written for a Lakota composer, Suzanne Kite, who works a lot with electronics, builds electronic instruments. And when I was talking with Suzanne one time, she had told me that there was some numerology in Lakota worldview about numbers adding up to 12, the significance of that, the importance of numbers 1, 2, and 4 inside of 12. 3 being an uncertain number, a number maybe perhaps to be avoided. And also this idea that she had said that geometry is women's work in Lakota way, which I thought was beautiful. And so the way you play this score is to traverse these paths. I suppose one could start at the top at the 4 and interpret these different positive and negative integers as parameters of music. So, maybe this is going up 4 steps on the piano or something, or maybe this is volume, maybe this is timbral, maybe it's speed assigned to these numbers. And one goes through and ends up either on a path of 3s or 12s. She performed this years ago as well, the same concert as Laura, and had actually inputted this as code into an instrument she built that is this braid of hair that responds directionally and spatially, a kind of feedback instrument. And that instrument was also a kind of variation on the installation she presented at Inner Ear Vision. Another artwork in the Biennial is a piece I made during lockdown called 3 Songs. I'm going to play an excerpt of the video, and it's not the full songs, but it's about a minute of each one. So I'll play that first.
Well, listen, yeah, I didn't taught legend, hey, hey, na hinel yesen, nehe atzaha, nehe atzajen, nehe debe hayla diskin, hakon shant betat hosh, seklejen.
And so these were 3 songs. The first one that you saw was sung by musician Sage Bond, who was formerly a student of mine in the Native American Composer Apprenticeship Project. She's also Dene and lives near Tuba City, Arizona. And she and I composed that song. And that song talks about a few different things. It talks about when Kit Carson tried to kill the entire tribe and relocate us to Fort Sumner, New Mexico, a place where there is no water, or it's not a place to live off of that land at all. There is no place to grow any kind of vegetable or any kind of food, and there was no livestock that was provided for our people, and a lot of people died during the long walk and the internment at Fort Sumner before they were allowed to go back to the reservation. Also, it talks about other raids that were happening to the Navajo people from the Mexican army, and also again from other US agents that were trying to basically just get rid of us. And this song, like the other two also, they talk about the ongoing encroachments into the land. So more so maybe in the video, you see in the background a conveyor belt of the Peabody coal mine, which of course is dug into the land and extracting coal out of it, which leads to other health problems for Navajo people in that area. And so that's the tower you see in the background with that belt coming down. And so that song is sung in Dene language. The second song is sung by a Yuchi opera singer who was also in the Sweetland Opera. Her name's Janine Washington. And she is singing a song that is based on a hymnal, a Cherokee hymnal. And we have added some lines about drowning in the Arkansas River. And this is something that happened to a lot of tribes that were moved from their homelands into Oklahoma as they were traversing the Mississippi River, the Missouri rivers, and the Arkansas River. And so that video was shot on the banks of the Arkansas, where there is a dam, a hydroelectric dam, in the background, which is now, kind of encroaching on that river and that community there, which is shared by a lot of tribes, not only the tribes that were moved into Oklahoma, but the original tribes of that area. And the third song is sung by an elder. Her name's Marianne Imarthla. Marianne Imarthla is a descendant of Chief Imarthla, who was the leader of the Seminole tribe when they were displaced from their territory in Florida, in the southern US, by Andrew Jackson, and were sent to live in central Oklahoma. And we added this song as well, is based on a hymnal, but there's lines added about Andrew Jackson inside of that. But they're a bit ambiguous as to if it's about Andrew Jackson or another king, whoever that king might be, maybe even the big king above. And that one has this water tower in the background, but it also is, the site of this is a monument in Seminole, Oklahoma, that celebrates the different bands that still survived as they were being relocated to Oklahoma. And so there's also different elements inside of the videos and the performances. Each drumstick is beaded and has a different symbol. So the symbol is also replicated onto the head of the drum. And in the case of the Navajo one, it's these peaks, these black peaks representing the sacred mountains, but also what has become these coal being extracted out of the rock in that area. In the second video, you see these waves that are beaded onto the drumstick, and then that is replicated onto the drum head. And then there's these rays of sunlight on the third drumstick, and also this appears onto the head of Marianne's drum. Or it's the same drum, but by that time these symbols appear onto the head. Now, to talk about the drum, the snare drum being the drum of military aggression, the symbol of the US Cavalry as they would go and move throughout the United States to remove these tribes. And I like to think that it's not the snare drum's fault. The snare drum was innocent. And there's an opportunity here for that instrument to be redeemed with the right songs. I also like to think that maybe these women just found this drum out there in the desert or near the banks of the river and used it for singing a song. Or maybe the drum was captured. The last piece goes back to 2016. And in the fall of 2016, it was the same month that Trump was elected, November 2016. I had an opportunity to go up to the Standing Rock Reservation when there was the no DAPL water protection that was happening there. And I was able to go because a friend of mine, an artist who is also based in New Mexico, Chanupa Hanska Lugar, he is from Standing Rock, and he was going back and forth to go visit family, but also, of course, to check out what was going on in his homelands. And in one of those trips, he asked if I wanted to go, and I said, yeah, I want to go. And so there's a much longer story to this. I mean, you know, really, I wanted to go just find out what was happening. I wasn't getting proper information. I don't think any of us were, you know, through not only the proper, so-called proper news, but even what we rely upon when we, you know, log into Facebook or Instagram or whatever. You know, we hear exaggeration sometimes or hyperbole, and, you know, nobody was really saying what was happening. And if somebody did, it might have sounded too outrageous to be believed, you know, and I wanted to understand more what was happening. And so I had to go. And I wanted to be a witness to what was happening. But at the same time, I didn't want to be I'm not a journalist or anything. I didn't want to go with a camera and stick it in people's faces. Since I work with sound and field recordings, I needed a second set of ears, but I definitely didn't want to bring a boom mic on all my mics and, you know, aim it at people praying and singing and you know, I'm not an anthropologist either, you know, so that I was very careful that I did not have this recording device and, you know, out there and capturing things that weren't meant to be captured. But there was so much information in the sounds of being there at Standing Rock, hearing the aggression of the private security and the North Dakota police, that it took me 5 years to listen back to a week and a half of recordings that I had made, hearing subtle things here and there. And I was also doing that at my time at Bemis, just going through like the hard drive I had of all of these recordings. There was this incident that happened after Thanksgiving. Well, let me back up. On Thanksgiving Day, you had maybe the largest gathering of water protectors that had ended at Standing Rock. And I think it was somewhere around maybe over 10,000 people, it was estimated. And everybody is yelling at the police and the DAPL security who were standing up on top of this hill. And everybody justifiably angry, yelling, saying, go home, you're not wanted here, leave us alone, at the top of their lungs. And I have recordings of that moment, drones, you know, the speaking back on a megaphone from the police. And this recording is not that. This recording that I'm going to play here was taken 2 days later, when the eldest women of the encampment had gathered water protectors to walk onto the backwater bridge that separates the reservation from Bismarck, North Dakota. If you remember some of the photos, there was this barricade that the police had put there to prevent, to basically block off the reservation from the outside world. And this group of maybe 20 or so women with another group of a couple, 200 or 300 behind them, walked right up to the police. And instead of yelling at the top of their lungs like we had heard 2 days before, just stared in silence at the police and the security. And those cops could not look back or say anything back out of shame and could only look down at the ground. And so the last piece I have in the biennial is, it's a dark room. There's another object in that room, but I won't speak about that. There's actually two other objects in that room, but you'll have to go to the exhibition to link those stories together. In this dark room, you hear what is 300 or 400 water protectors gathering together, but being absolutely quiet, and the power of that sound. And so it's about a 15-minute recording. If you go outside the Whitney Museum, you'll see a billboard, and it is a photo I also snapped at that moment. And those are the pieces. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Raven. It was really, really lovely to go through all the scores with you. I feel like I've seen them in so many different iterations, but to really kind of see them and then sort of see the language behind them, and, you know, hear the stories about how some of them came about, especially obviously I love the one about Laura and how she's, you know, where she came from and now where she lives, and all of, you know, how the sort of tempo is changing. But then thinking about Suzanne Kites and how that morphed, you know, she took that score and then, you know, used that to kind of create new work on her own. And I really love that collaboration. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk about collaboration within your practice a little bit, you know, even with just some of the women that you just, you know, did the 3 songs with too.
Yeah. I think, you know, being a musician, I think that's kind of the natural inclination to start thinking about work, you know, especially if I'm composing something, then, you know, I'm excited by the possibility that somebody else is going to play that, you know, that I'm not going to play that. I mean, there's a lot, most of the things I write, I can't play that. I'm not good enough to play, you know, some of these. You write for, you know, other instruments that you don't know how to play. So that's what keeps me interested. And especially with voice, you know, there's maybe a particular voice that is needed for something that's being, words that are being written, or the meaning can change if it ends up with a different voice than was intended. And so I think a lot of things that I do are they might begin with some idea that I have, but I always try to find an opportunity to share that with others, you know, and to realize it with other people.
Yeah.
And so in the case of this, I mean, making these, I guess, portraitures, it was more than me just going and making something and then saying, I made this for you. I really wanted it to be a process of where I'm, you know, talking with them, asking them questions, not only about themselves, but just their philosophies on making music, on art, on what they do, you know, talking with Suzanne about what she does, and Olivia, you know, and learning from them, and then putting that into not putting that into a score necessarily to tell the story, but to use it as an opportunity to learn more about another kind of practice and see if I can replicate that with the language of the score, or the process that one who took on the score would have to also learn in order to perform it. But that was the case with almost all of them, where we spoke at length. And so there's more continuation of this project. There's going to be a performance, hopefully, of everyone that I wrote them for. Will perform them at the Whitney on July 16th. There's a couple concerts planned. And then I'm in the process of writing this book that, kind of goes deeper into each score, what it means, how it's performed, and then writing from each of the women I wrote for.
Yeah, I feel like it's a book project waiting to happen.
I'm working on it. It's
Yeah.
taken a while.
Well, that's okay. I think you've been a little busy.
Yeah.
Are there any questions from the audience at all? Feel free to just like unmute yourself if you have one. The other thing I wanted to ask about was just for the 3 songs piece, like how you decided to show that at the Whitney. Like, what does it look like when you're entering?
Yeah, that one is, group shows are hard for sound, it's like there's always competing, different sounds. But that one is 3 channels of video. So on the far left is Sage, who is the youngest of the 3, then goes all the way to the right side where Janine sings her song. And then in the middle, concluding with the elder, Marianne, and then cycles back. But every time it resyncs, all 3 hit their snare drum on each of their channels at the same time, and then it cycles through again. So in this composite, you just see one of the snare drums, but yeah, they're all kind of cycling and have their own opportunity. And there was when you see it at the Whitney, there's a little bit of isolation in terms of these kind of, they're not hyper-directional speakers, but they're kind of these downward shower speakers that help isolate the sound a bit and help position the viewer into the different locations they can best see.
Oh, kind of like those dome things.
They're not quite the dome. They're like a dome with a little bit more spread, I guess.
Okay.
They're not exactly the dome.
Right. I actually think Deani had those on her piece at the Kemper, similar kind of thing. Yeah. Chris had a question. Could you talk about the process with the Whitney curators in selecting the work for the show? Good question, Chris.
Yeah. I showed him everything I was working on at the time, and these pieces weren't consciously about women. I was working on the Standing Rock thing, and I'm still working on the Standing Rock thing because there's all these other recordings in there. But I shared that particular one with them. And I had shared the scores with them, which were still in process at the time. And then I had wanted to do these 3 songs, and those were another project. And that was not completed at all yet, but I told them about what I was wanting to do. And so, they linked all of these together in saying, thinking that they all on the topic of this leadership and this resistance, I think was something that I had not envisioned. I didn't envision them being shown together. They just happened to be some of the things I was working on. So I'm really happy that they saw that and put them together, because I like that they can speak to each other in that way and they tell that story. But that was it. I'm really happy the game let me have so much work in there too. Gave me a lot of space for this. So, and my collaborators. So I think, I say that, but then, as we talk about collaboration, also I like to think that they made enough space for all of us. 16 of us who worked on this stuff. So.
Yeah. Oh, I lost you. Where'd you go? I literally okay, there we go. Moved my mouse and all of a sudden.
But a little bit more to Chris's question. I mean, that was back in 2019, end of 2019, I think, that they were speaking with me. So, you know, of course they had to postpone the exhibition too. And so, yeah, I don't know what the process was like for others, but I was really fortunate to have an in-person studio visit with them, because I know that wasn't possible for a lot of people.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think that pandemic Zoom studio visit life. I was just going to drop in the chat the link for Sweetland, for people if they haven't seen it. I believe you can buy it to watch. But that was something that you were kind of in the process of working on, and I love that Carmina was part of it, and then Carmina ended up coming to Bemis last fall and also was working on sort of a really large project while she was here about Mono Lake. So there's sort of like this really nice kind of continuation of artists that, you know, you've worked with that have kind of, you know, come through Bemis too, and hopefully we'll continue to cycle through. But yeah, and Chanupa also was in a show at Bemis many years ago. So do you want to talk about working on the opera a little bit and how that kind of came about? Because that story is pretty interesting as well, I think.
Yeah, that was a project that started in, I think that was as far back as 2017. There was originally this idea or this proposal from an organization in Boston. They wanted to do an opera about the, I guess, you know, Plymouth Rock and the first Thanksgiving and all of that, because the anniversary of Plymouth Rock was coming up. And this proposal was to Yuval Sharon, who is known for these wild operas that he's been doing in Los Angeles. And he approached me, and probably because they wanted a native person on this, but he had known of my work, and he didn't like the idea any more than I did. You know, I mean, we were skeptical of that. I think most people should be, you know, especially because I have nothing to do with Plymouth Rock. But I'm really grateful that he and I, you know, he gave me the opportunity, and he himself gave himself an opportunity to think through, okay, well, what can we do with this? What could we speak about with this opportunity, you know, of speaking about this mythological event, this, you know, this union of pilgrims and native people. And, you know, where has this been replicated elsewhere? I mean, what, you know, even before Plymouth Rock, the Spanish were in the Southwest, and you know, we have these histories all over the Americas. So that's where we decided to make an opera in between, you know, this myth and this history that we were taught, and this history that, you know, we're uncovering as being probably the more realistic story. And yeah, it grew larger and larger. It turned into a piece with 50 instrumentalists and 30 singers, and actually became 2 parallel operas. And we roped in Chanupa, who first came on as costume designer, but has such brilliant ideas that you've all asked him to be co-director of the opera. And we premiered it in March of 2020, and it only made it through half its run, and then, you know, COVID hit it and ended it. So the hope is it'll happen again somewhere. I don't know where. It's also
I mean, maybe it should happen here.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe.
Not in my house, but in Omaha.
What I'm excited about is we built in, I mean, we always prepared that there's an opportunity for it if it were to be shown again, that it doesn't have to be in Los Angeles. I mean, the opera was tailored to the history of Los Angeles by the time you get to the conclusion, but we composed it in a way where I think it's adaptable to different cities in the United States, because there's a lot of shared history that can be inputted back into it. And I think, you know, the opera is fluid enough, and the story is fluid enough that it would match the history of a lot of places.
Good to know, just for my brain for later. But yeah, if you haven't seen it, I dropped the link in. So take some time and support it, and you can watch it. Not like being there in person, but still. Well, if there aren't any other questions, comments, anything, thank you so much, Raven, for sharing your work with us tonight.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Bemis.
And thank you everyone for joining us, and please join us for future programming. Like I said, Friday night, if you're in the area, come to Low End. If not, you can stream it on our Twitch channel, which is just twitch.tv/Bemis Center. So it's going to be a great show. All right, everyone, stay safe. Thank you again. Bye.